Okay, this session explores how to set up reverb zones to make any kind of orchestral session sound more realistic by improving the imaging. So the strings is all I've got loaded in here, and it's only a short example, but as you can see, they're all panned to the center at the moment, and there's no reverb at all whatsoever. So we'll have a very quick listen to the dry signal. And a louder section over here. Okay, so the aim now is to set up, in a way, a kind of virtual stage. So the reason I'm doing that, rather than using reverb put in on each individual channel, is that then if I had a larger session and there were woodwind and brass and percussion and all sorts of other things, we could just decide where that particular instrument was and then send them to the correct place on the stage. So just to explain that then, so starting with the first violins, they are obviously going to be at the front left, and I'm going to, just for the purposes of this tutorial, only set up 4 places on the stage. So we could potentially have 6 or 8, I think would be a good number, but I'm just going to do 4 for now just to explain this. So I'm going to set up a few buses, so that's going to go front left. The violas are going to go sort of center left, then the cellos are going to go center right, and the basses are going to go all the way to the right. So those are my 4 main zones across the stage, and those are the 4 main voices, if you like. So let's just send all of the signal over, just again to keep this really simple for now, and we'll name these up. So front left FL, what did I say, front center left, front center right, and then front right. So on all of these we then need to put in a reverb, so we're going to just use Logic's Space Designer, and we are going to use the same setting for all of them for now, which is going to be an indoor space such as a concert hall. Making sure that the dry signal is obviously set to 0, because we've got the dry channels going to stereo out as well as these auxiliaries, so we're mixing the reverb sound here, we're not just using it as a send and return. Okay, so let's have a look at this one that I've put in, and we're just going to have to copy that across to the others. So copy and paste, and the last one. Okay, so we've now set up 4 identical reverbs, all the concert hall, and we've sent the violins to the front left. We're going to send the second violins also to front left. We could differentiate these slightly by panning them here, but I'll talk about panning in a minute. So then the violas are going to go also to this center left. And that's the beauty of having these set up, because any other instrument we now set up, we can just decide, oh yeah, that's going to go to, clarinets or whatever, would have to then go to, a middle, well, we've done the front ones, but if we had more zones set up, we could just keep allocating instrument as we see fit. All right, so to demonstrate why panning is a bit of a funny issue when you've got reverb set up, especially if we're dealing with stereo tracks. So you might decide, if you want to start panning these, you might even be looking at the direction mixer, to be honest, because you've got the you won't have any kind of signal loss then, and you're keeping the spread the same and just moving the direction here. But again, that's a different tutorial really. So let's assume that's okay to pan these. We're just going to listen to this. Let's have a look at, let's do violas. And if we listen to the violas dry to begin with, so that's not going to come out to this center left pan. And so here we go, the violas. So completely dry. Now if I pan the violas to where I thought they ought to sit, so let's say the viola's about here or something. Then that works very well. I mean, panning a dry signal is great. But let's just, as an example, let's pan them dead left. I know they're not going to sit there, but it's just an example. So that works terribly well. We're going to hear them only in the left channel now. But what happens when we allow this send to take them over to the reverb then? Because the reverb is a stereo channel here, we're going to get pretty much, I'd say, as much information out of both channels. So all of a sudden this becomes pretty much useless, or rather it's very, very subtle. You'd have to go really hard left to even get it vaguely coming from the left. So this is then my suggestion, which is a little bit contentious perhaps, but we would use this viola reverb here, or this zone on the stage, and we'll do the same with all of them. We're going to actually change the panning on the reverb as well to agree a little bit with where the instruments are going. So if we set, let's just be geeky and have the same number. If we now set the reverb to 15 and 15 here, and then listen to it again, I think that then starts getting quite realistic. So that's the one thing to say about zones. So then following on from that logic, let's put the violins much harder left, and we can subtly differentiate here if you like. So very hard left for first violins, slightly less for those. Let's have the cellos sitting about there and the double basses nearly all the way over there. And then again we could do a little bit of panning here to just kind of mimic that, but it will support it much better this way than if the instruments were panned but the reverbs were left on stereo. It just becomes a bit of a soup because you've got too much signal coming out of all different places. Now, of course, you can go into the zones and then dampen sections. So, for instance, you might want to look at the envelope of the EQ in the bass parts, for instance, to make sure that they don't accumulate too much low information and those sorts of things. But again, there's not enough scope here to kind of address all those things. But let's just have a listen to what that's done. So by setting up 4 distinct zones across the front of the stage, left to right, and then having the panning kind of mimic, or at least be a bit more sympathetic towards those zones, that should sound a lot better already. Great. So I was just tweaking them a bit there. I think ultimately the zones shouldn't be differentiated too dramatically in terms of the panning for the stereo auxiliaries, just because it is still part of the same space ultimately, and you do want a bit of crossbleed, and then these can maybe be more dramatic, and then together that produces a fairly realistic result. Anyway, we're going to show time for just one more quick thing. So that would be the kind of poor man's version of setting up distinct different zones. In fact, we don't need the sends at all anymore. But a rather nice way of doing it as well would be, if you can afford this, to go for the Altiverb solution, which is a dedicated reverb plugin, and this you would then want to use on each channel purely because there's a positioner function that I'm using for this. I'll just show a couple. So for instance, the violins are literally coming from this virtual stage from within Altiverb, so I can't see my pannings, which is the only downside, but setting them up here produces an incredibly realistic result. If we just have a listen to the violins on their own. Oh, it's amazing how you can just move it all around. Put them back there. So, without a verb instantiated then, on all of these, so again they're set up as you might expect. Instead of panning, I've then set them up slightly differently here. They're stereo purely because there's more instruments. This track is a mixdown already of several of the same instrument, family playing together. So that's why I've kept the stereo signal just to thicken it up a little bit. But yeah, so here we go. The wet signal then without a verb, using zones, reverb zones.